All right. Hello and welcome back to the Marketing Ping Pong podcast. My name is Ali,
And my name is Duncan.
and we are here today to talk about marketing. This podcast is all about marketing and our love for marketing. And Duncan and I both have our own little businesses that we work in. I say little businesses. We have fantastic, huge, amazing businesses.
Giant.
A single person can only own so many business, but that doesn't mean we are prevented from thinking about and dreaming about and building entire worlds around businesses we would love to start and open, or even businesses we would dread to open. One of the themes of this podcast is we like to pick fun businesses, but we also like to pick like super boring businesses. And sometimes the boring businesses are even more fun to market than the fun businesses. But this week, we're going to talk about a fun business. I have no idea what the business is going to be. So this week, it was Duncan's turn to pick a fun business. So, Duncan, what fun business are we going to play some marketing ping pong with tonight?
Yes, I am excited for this episode, just like I've been excited for all the other ones, but this one in particular because I think I found a fun business that will be as fun, if not more fun, than the boring businesses that we've done. So that's what we found. It's like
we have to step up our game with the fun businesses because the boring businesses just keep outpacing them.
Yes, we got to amp it up. You know, the financial advisor was more fun than the first fun business we did. It's like we gotta step it up a little bit. So that's what I'm trying to do here, doing something a little bit out of the box and tapping into a trend that I've been seeing. So I am a 90s kid, and I heard a thing recently where it was a person who basically analyzes trends. They compile data for companies and try and project what's going to be popular on the consumer level. Like, that's his whole business. Very interesting guy. But he was talking about how really like pop culture started to take a dive after the 90s. It was like there's stuff that was in vogue and very popular, and that everybody was talking about as far as celebrities go. And that all kind of started to downward trend after the 90s. And like today, you know, the only kind of like pop culture-y things that I could mention are things that have to do with our industry, right? So like the ChatGPT CEO got ousted. You know, I couldn't tell you any of the celebrities that are in the news. That may be because I'm 30 now and my knees are not working anymore. Or, you know, it could also be because pop culture is starting to decline and things are becoming a little more diffuse. But I do get this kind of thing from a lot of the younger kids that I talk to as well, right? There aren't these really like big cultural icons like there were in the 90s, early 2000s. And that's what my business idea is riding on. It's riding on this trend that the 90s is still cool and it's making a comeback, but not just the 90s, a lot of different decades throughout history. So what we are going to do, Ali, we are going to create a nostalgia business. All right. So we are in the business of making people relive the heydays of the 90s and generations before. All right. So I need some help kind of figuring out this idea. It is a very harebrained scheme, but I think that we can have different rooms in this business that are themed to different decades. So we have like the 90s room where there's 90s merch for sale and 90s music playing, and you can get food from the 90s and clear Pepsi and, you know, all this stuff that kind of came and went
Zima.
in the 90s. Say again?
Zima.
Yeah, exactly. All the stuff from the 90s is there. And then we can also have 80s. And we can have 70s, and we can go all the way back as far as we want to go, as far as into recorded history as we have information about the things that they had. But I do think that this would be kind of an interesting novel idea. And how do we turn this into an experience in addition to like a shopping experience? So like I'm thinking, you know, you'll have all the merch, right? Like you can get like Rugrats shirts. Those are definitely back in style, right? There's a lot of that stuff that's kind of in right now. Kids are wearing Converse, you know, Chuck Taylors, like all that stuff is kind of still coming back. Still in style or coming back in style. So I think that that's a big idea in and of itself, having the merch, but also having it be an experience. Maybe we have before we get into it anymore, what do you think of my idea?
I think that you are correct in that there is very little pop culture that's been happening after 2000s. I've seen TikTok videos several times where they talk about why do people from the early 2000s look the same as the people today?
Mm-hmm.
Because it really hasn't changed. There hasn't been strong influences in the pop culture
Yep.
like there used to be. I remember when Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise both had their babies at the same time. And that was like the top of the news and
Yeah.
everybody knew about the babies.
Yep.
And now like, who cares? Like somebody
Yep.
has a baby, nobody really cares.
Yep.
So I totally hear you on that. This idea of having like a business that has different rooms. The first place my mind goes is a better museum. Like this is a museum that's better than a museum. So museums are old and dusty and not very interactive generally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the movie Greatest Showman, which I'm sure you've seen as a Barnum person. And I remember when he buys the museum and his kids were falling asleep and the little girl says, Dad, your museum's full of dead things. You need living things in your museum because it's boring. It's dead things. And so that's what this makes me think of. Like a museum is almost a dead thing. How can we make it a living thing that is also something you can purchase from? So I immediately thought about things like the Disney store, right?
Yep.
You go to the Disney store, it feels like an experience. I don't know, do they still have Disney stores? When I was younger, the Disney store was like a big deal, right?
Yep.
And you go there and you're experiencing all of these colors and music and your favorite characters as plushies and coffee cups and t-shirts. And it was a way to kind of experience that feeling, but you were also expected to buy something.
Yes.
And then there's another store that is at one of the malls here. I can't remember which mall we were at. I don't know. They all blend in together. One of the malls down here has kind of I don't know if we want to call it pop culture, but it's like animated movies, Harry Potter's in there.
Yeah.
Doctor Who, they have a Doctor Who section. And so they have all these different sections for your favorite stuff. And Willow and I walked around that store just like our jaws dropped. Like, this is so much fun. And you could see things like even Disney characters presented in very different ways on like a really nice looking sweatshirt, but then it's got little Ariels along the bottom of it or flounder or something like that. So it's like a more subtle way to express yourself. And having that connection with these characters that we all like love, right? And it was exciting to go to each segment. So that's what I'm thinking as you're saying this. Like,
yes.
Having some kind of museum where every room is themed the theme. I'm also thinking about the Airbnbs that will do like a full 80s theme Airbnb or 70s, or they'll do they'll take a movie and they'll theme the entire room after a movie. I think that's so smart. If you're going to have an Airbnb, why would you make it like the most boring, bland thing ever?
Right.
So a museum, like, I hate the word because the word is boring, but kind of a museum sort experience where you have memorabilia and you buy the props from the particular movie. You have an original pair of XYZ there. Maybe this place also deals in collectibles. So you have new merch and collectible merch as well that they can get an original Air Jordans or something like that.
Exactly.
I think you even need to go back super far. I think you need to go back maybe to the 60s. If you go back too far, then it starts to get old and dusty again. But maybe that's a good place for grandma and grandpa to go while you're hanging out in the 90s room, right?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's there are kind of like famous decades. I don't know if you'd have to go sequentially all the way back, but you could do like a 20s kind of thing where you have like the formal wear and the music and the food, and you could have, if it's going to go this far.
Depression room?
No, we're gonna skip. We're gonna skip the Depression.
The 30s. What about the war? Like,
no war. No.
I mean, those two decades aren't there. We go from the 20s to the 50s.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, like we don't even know 30s and 40s. We've never heard of it. We just
Yeah,
take that whole
I don't know
chunk of
what
time
you're
out
talking
of
about.
there. Yeah, we're only gonna do the fun decades.
No sugar in this room because that's been rationed.
Yeah, so I like that. I like it's like a nostalgia museum, right? It's like people are craving these things that remind them of simpler times, better times, happier times, and we're going to package that up, slap a price on it, and then offer it to the public, right? I love that idea because people are willing to pay for that feeling, right? Where people buy based on emotions, and if you can package an emotion that's as powerful as nostalgia that
A
wraps up a lot
childhood
of
memory. Yeah,
yes
you're packaging up a childhood memory and putting a price
exactly.
tag on it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think that you're going to get two waves of people, right? So you're going to get the people that are craving the nostalgia, and then you're going to get the kids now that are trying to like be a part of that and
Feel
still have
cool
some of
because the
that.
previous decades were cool.
Yes, yep, exactly. So you're going to get a little bit of both, and you're going to get the parents who want their kids to wear the Rugrats shirt and like
Mhm.
watch the Rugrats VHS tapes. We're going to sell a VHS again. We're going to bring it back.
Yep.
It's going to be
You gotta have
cool.
the player. You can buy the player and you can buy the tapes. Yep.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. So I think that all that stuff is really powerful, and having actual collectibles in addition to merch would be a unique thing that I haven't seen. I actually I remember that store that you talked about because they have Studio Ghibli stuff, and like I'm
Yep.
crazy about that, and like I it always stands out to me when I see it at a store, and that is the vibe, right? It's like I want the nice kind of like subtle stuff that isn't like gaudy this brand, but
Right.
I also want like shirts from the 90s that
Right.
we sourced from a Goodwill or whatever, like that
Yep.
stuff I think is important to have as well. And yeah, that's my business, and I think it would be super fun. This is a business I would go to and I would buy stuff at, so that's why I picked it.
So another thing that made me popped into my head is when you go to those resorts, right? You go to a resort that like the water park resort I talked about in the previous episode. We have a we have a huge amusement park in our town, but we also have like 5 water parks as well,
Mm-hmm.
that are indoor water parks that go year round.
Mm.
And at one of these resorts, they have different themed restaurants in different areas of the resort. So you could kind of go to this jungle theme one, you could go to this high upscale one, you can
Yep.
go to just like the candied apples and things like that. So I really, really like the idea. If we're going to do it, we do it right. We bring in the food. And
Yes.
I love the idea of this kind of being a museum big enough that like you might even have cars in certain rooms,
Yeah.
right? You might have like an old truck or a car or something that people can look at and touch or not touch or whatever.
Yep.
And then each segment of this museum would have its own restaurant. It doesn't have to be a super fancy, but it should have authentic food from that era.
you
And
could
that's
probably
the problem.
even you
What's
could
that?
probably even find you could probably even source um iconic booths and tables. You
Mhm.
know how like Taco Bell used to be like weird, kind of like, you know what I'm talking about. It just had a look to it. You could
Sure.
probably source the booths and like signage from old restaurants. Obviously, maybe Taco Bell is not the best idea, but you know what I'm saying.
Guys, remember Taco Bell from the 90s? Wasn't that great?
Yeah, yeah. I went there
Big
every
old
day for
taco
lunch.
salad.
Yeah,
That
yeah. But
we,
no, I
the
love that.
90s one definitely has to have like a taco salad. Like that's my
Yes,
memory from the 90s is
right.
eating those big taco. Do they still have those? I don't
I
even
don't know. Taco salads. It's big in any generation.
know. Everybody likes a taco salad.
Everybody likes taco salad.
Um yeah, I love that. So you can actually source the booths and the tables and the signage. You get the colors right. Like they always talk about that 80s kind of turquoise,
Yep.
that turquoise 80s color that would just be permeate everything in the 80s room.
Yes. Yep.
And then have real authentic food. So what I was going to say is that makes me mad in some of these restaurants. Like I've looked at, Tim and I have never been on a cruise. It's our goal. Eventually, one of these days, we're going to go on a cruise. And
Sure.
what I love about going on a cruise is all the different restaurants. I love the idea, but when I actually look at the restaurants, it's just like regular
Nothing
food, and it's
special. Yeah.
nothing special and nothing interesting. And I'm like, why would I choose this restaurant over that restaurant?
Yep.
Like it really, they have different themes, but they just then sell the same stuff.
Yep.
So I want real, authentic, specific foods from that era in each one of these individual restaurants that are happening in this whole big deal,
Yep.
that the food itself is the draw. Like, so I guess the biggest question is what makes people want to go? We're
Hmm.
all going to go there and go shopping. I mean, you could do that. Bass Pro does that. It's a big, like, it's
Fish
a
tank.
big experience. Yeah, it's big business, but it's a big experience that you're having. But all it really is shopping.
Yep. Yeah, I
So
think you could definitely have 90s specific cover bands come and do events like music there, different era cover bands doing music there. I think is a good idea.
absolutely.
Make
Or
it
the
an
real artists
attraction.
coming in.
Yes, yep. A
Getting the
lot of
kids
them
on the
do.
block there, I'm there.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they're in there. I saw Salt and Peppa not that long ago. But anyway, it doesn't matter. You can get those bands for sure. There's a lot of them doing like not farewell tours, but like welcome, come back tours or whatever. Definitely an option there. Um, Events, right? We talk about in-person events almost every time, and I think that it's like people need a reason to get up off the couch. If it's a special thing that's only going to happen once, you're never going to be able to get to see this band here again. Limited time kind of thing. Give them some scarcity. Give them a reason to come to this special thing. I think that people will come, and then they'll spend the money, right?
no,
You
I
want a
totally
shirt.
agree.
You want a
Yeah.
band shirt from the concert.
If yeah, if you have the events,
Mm-hmm.
then you have the shopping and you have the food, and you're just small town famous because you've created this really unique experience that you
Yep.
can't get anywhere else. And the experience is experiencing the different decades,
Yep.
looking at the things. As boring as museums are, and it's not that I dislike museums, like
They're pretty
I
boring.
do, they are pretty boring. Like, I
Yeah.
like to go to the Natural History Museum in DC and see like the giant blue whale and stuff like that. But then you're like, okay, I saw the blue whale, and now we have to walk and stop and look at this thing, and then
Yep.
walk and stop and look at this thing. So if we create it as an experience where there's merch, hands-on displays, which I don't quite know what that would be. It could be an Atari set up, and we were just talking about Atari.
Yeah, I was thinking the reason I got this idea, there's a local business that sells vintage games. They buy, restore, and sell vintage video games, and that could be a big part of it. You could have a
Mhm.
place where they could sit down on a couch that looks like it's straight out of the 90s, and they could play the video games from the 90s on the systems and TVs from the 90s, like all of that
Yeah, you
full
have to have the
experience.
crappy TV that goes with
Yes.
it.
Yeah, 100%. And like you could have video game tournaments for those games as well. Like that's what
Yes.
that business does. They have gaming tournaments and they bring people in from all over the place and you can win cash prizes and lots of fun stuff. And I think that there are things from the 90s that like video games that are being remade now because of how popular that they are. Just to speak to that trend again, it's like all we're doing is tapping into this thing that's happening and riding a wave, right? Like I
Mhm.
think that so many businesses, so many business owners or entrepreneurs try and come up with something like new and innovative, but there's so much fun in these ideas that you can just like look and see a trend happening and say we're going to do something with this. Like this is a fun thing. People want it right now, so let's make something out of it.
Well, look what's happening with movies and TV, because you're right, there's not a whole lot of culture now, so they keep
Mhm.
going back.
Yep.
They're remaking movies. They're for the fifth time, like with Star is Born. Like, I don't know how many times that one is. But
Yeah, a new Karate Kid series.
yeah,
Like, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Exact
yeah.
Cobra Kai. Like,
Yep,
I love Cobra Kai. That is one of my favorite shows. And it's
yep.
because I know these guys.
Hmm.
I grew up watching these guys, and now
Yep.
I get to see how Johnny actually turned out, and I get to see how everything panned out.
Yes.
So yeah, the nostalgia is really strong right now. And
Yep.
and
Yep.
and also the desire for parents to show their kids. There's a guy I follow on TikTok that he shows his daughter things that he had that were like the super cool thing when he was a kid.
Yeah.
So he gives her a Game Boy, and she's like trying to figure out
Yeah.
where
What
the
is
where
this
the
thing?
headphones
Yeah.
plug, or
Yeah.
where the iPods, how are AirPods going to connect with it,
Yeah.
and a Walkman, and
Yeah. They're like,
and a
what is
CD player.
this?
Yeah, exactly. And so like he's getting a kick out of reliving his childhood
Oh
and
man.
showing her at the same time. And so she's like,
Yes.
like, why did you think this was cool? He goes, oh man, everybody on the playground had one. Like, this is the
Yeah, yeah,
coolest
yeah.
thing.
And
And
you
that
can
was to
do
me,
that
that's
in person. You can do that
yeah,
in person at this museum. Like, here's the
that's the
hands-on
thing.
thing. Give
Yep.
this to your kid and see if they can figure out how to use it. And
Yeah.
take pictures of them doing it and post it on social media. It's like,
Yeah.
oh man, that's
Videos of the
great.
kids trying to play Atari and
Yes.
stuff like that. I think that's so good.
Yep.
So merch, definitely t-shirts, modern merch, vintage merch, modern
Collectibles.
merch
Yep.
that fits in the whole thing.
Hmm.
And then I mentioned, I think on the previous episode, or maybe I just was talking to you about the show Unwrapped,
Hmm.
on Food Network, and they talk a lot about vintage candies and how the stories behind them, how they got their name, and certain candy bars that are no longer in production, and some that are in production but are extremely difficult to find because they do
Mm.
small batches of them every year.
Yep.
So I would lean into that part personally. Like, you can do the video games. I want to play with the candy and the the packaged foods that they again remember having as a kid. Because when you say that to somebody and you mention like I don't know, Clark bar or something. Oh my gosh, I used to love Clark bars. That was
Yeah.
like one of my favorites. 90s candy, by the way. I don't know if Reese's will cooperate with us on this, but them canceling the Nutrageous is a crime against
It's
humanity.
criminal. Ugh.
I look every time I'm there, and I finally just realized, no, it's time to let it go.
Mm.
They're not bringing it back. That
We
is
gotta
the
get we gotta
best
build
candy.
our nostalgia museum big enough that we have sway with the
Yes,
Reese's
we have some
company.
clout and be
Yeah,
like,
that's the
the
whole
people
reason we're doing
demand
this
it.
museum. We're bringing Nutrageous back.
Nutrageous is the best candy bar that was ever invented.
Sure.
And it's criminal. It's absolutely criminal. But I even like I used to have like the Reese cup T-shirt,
Yep.
like those old style. They had like the
Classic.
different candy T-shirts and things like that. I
Yep.
think that there's so many memories that are attached to food, both through the dining experience, what you would get at a diner, what you would get at a fast food restaurant, but then also what you would get at the corner store.
Yep.
The
Hmm.
those nostalgic little bits and pieces, all the way down to Tim and I were watching Unwrapped, and they were talking about chocolate syrup, and I was like, "Do you remember we used to buy chocolate syrup in a can?"
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you remember that?
With a lid. Yeah, and you'd like
And you'd
spoon
have
it
to
out.
use the bottle opener, the sharp end of the
Yep.
bottle opener to poke the holes in it, and then you
Yeah.
had like a yellow lid that you put on top.
Yeah.
And then when you wanted to pour your chocolate syrup, and I'm trying to explain this to the kids, and they're like a pineapple, like a can of pineapple. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
Yeah.
really?"
Exactly. But
Yeah,
chocolate syrup. Yeah.
and just be able to again have those things that they'll buy it because they remember it. They'll
Yes.
buy it because they remember it, simply because they remember it and they want to put it on the shelf. They buy it because they remember their mom making them chocolate milk with
Mm.
that can.
Yep.
They'll buy it for all of the memories that are attached to it. I think this is fabulous.
Great. I'm in. Let's do it. Yeah, nostalgia, it's so powerful, right? Like I'm kind of not sick of it. That's probably not the right way to put it. It's hard selling a B2B service to a company. It
Hmm.
is not difficult to sell fun. And that's, I think, the thing that we keep hitting with these fun businesses. It's like, it's not hard. So we don't need to try that hard to make the marketing
Yeah, we don't
effective,
even have to be that creative. We just
right?
created the business. Like, we could
Yeah.
end the podcast now, 23 minutes in.
Yes, the business
Nailed it.
itself is the marketing. It's like nostalgia museum. Well, what is that? Like I don't have to try and sell it. People are like, they want to know. They already
Yeah.
want to know what it is. Just like a vintage video game store. It's like, oh, okay, cool. I want to know more. I'm already into it. I want to go in and see if they have Pong, right? Like
Right.
it sells itself, and in some ways that's like easier for us, but in some ways like now it's harder because like we now what do we do?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
sells
Now what do
itself.
we do? Like,
Yeah.
we already got the bands, we already got the food, we already got the video games, we got the merch.
Yeah.
Done.
Done. Sold. I'm sending this to investors tonight.
There you go. Okay, so then let's try to make it harder.
Okay.
All right, here's a difficult thing about it. Let's say we have the 20s, because we're going to skip the 30s and 40s because that was depression. We don't want to sell depression. We want to sell fun, and the 20s are flapper fun.
Very hard to sell depression.
Yeah, it's like the 30s, grapes of wrath.
Yeah, hey, are you out of food? Let's
The restaurant's empty. Like
God.
the
It's
merch.
funny though. It's
There's
funny
only one
though,
T-shirt hanging on the merch.
and it's made out of one of those the bags that rice came in.
Burlap bags,
Oh
yeah.
my God, it's so
Flour
depressing.
sacks.
That's why they call it the depression. Jeez.
Although, I mean, you could say something about like making like little girls' dresses out of faux
Yeah.
flour sacks and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Um,
And also that's like the era that was like, you had the candy boom from the tens and the 20s, and then the
mm,
depression hit, and they just made more money. Like Hershey and all those guys made more money because they were like, you can just replace your meal with a candy bar for a nickel or whatever,
mhm.
and that they made just money hand over fist during the depression, which is crazy to me. So you could do like a candy kind of thing there, but
So the chocolate syrup was from the 1910s or 20s. It was called Bosco's, which I
mm,
don't really know that brand, but it's called Bosco's, and it was sold as a chocolate flavored syrup to get enough iron in your kids.
yep. Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, "Oh, the syrup tastes so good!" Like they forgot about the iron part, and they're like, "Here, just drink sugar syrup." And that would have been like after the 40s, right?
Yep.
They're like,
Yep.
"Your kids are getting enough iron; they just want chocolate."
Yes. Yeah. That's
Not
just
worried about
packaging
getting.
sugar. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I think it's so interesting when you look at that time, the difference between now, where so much of what they created was based on this idea of you need to get enough nutrients in your children. Like
Yeah.
there was so much focus there of this has vitamins and minerals, or there was a therapeutic end to it, like Coca-Cola, right?
Yep.
Coca-Cola wasn't a casual thing to drink. It was
Medicine.
medicinal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these things that we now know as junk food started off as like, we don't want your children to starve to death.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you give them this and they'll eat it because it tastes good.
Yeah, it's crazy to see that progression of marketing and like what people care about throughout different ages, because it's like it went from necessity, like what do we need,
Right.
to now we have everything we need, so we're leaning into pleasure and all that. It's just like
Yeah.
different things, different selling points, different pain points. Very different. Like
Absolutely.
we don't have any pain points really now. It's like we
Right.
do, but like the general consumer doesn't have to worry about not getting enough nutrition. Their kids not getting
Right.
enough nutrition.
Yeah.
Very interesting to see that. Yeah, it was like cornflakes too. They were like that. It wasn't like
Yeah.
it wasn't like a snack food or like a breakfast
Well,
food. It was like
I think
healthy.
the bran flakes was supposed to be to keep people from having impure thoughts so they
Yeah.
don't do
Mhm.
XYZ things to themselves
Yeah.
because it
There's
was so boring and bland that they wouldn't be
yes. Yeah,
excited by flavor.
correct. Yeah, the guy that came up with them and his main competition, the main guy was, I believe, a psychologist. He was like he had a mental health facility, and then somebody that worked for him stole the idea and ran with it and marketed it a different way. Very interesting story.
One of the guys was like a super religious
Yes.
person. One of
Yeah.
them was like super duper religious. Like
Yeah.
we cannot have anybody like enjoying themselves,
Yeah.
so
I
we're
think
gonna
that
make
was
the most.
Kellogg. I'm pretty sure that was actually Kellogg.
It could be Kellogg.
But anyway,
Yeah.
you were
Okay, so
saying
we
the
got our.
20s.
So here is our challenge. We have the 20s,
Mm-hmm.
50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that's what 20, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. That's six of them.
Okay.
That's six different generations. I personally would relate to the 80s and the 90s, right? I was a kid in the 80s, I was a teenager in the 90s. So
Mm-hmm.
I would relate to those two. The things that are in the 50s, 60s, 70s, less interesting. Maybe some 70s bleeds over into the 80s,
Sure.
20s, less interesting to me. So how do we market something where we're talking to so many different generations? What do we do with our social media? How do we have a consistent brand that is not alienating part of our market at a time? Because like, I don't care about 50s. That's not nostalgia for me. It doesn't make me feel good because I wasn't there. But I really care about the 80s and the strawberry shortcake house because that's what I wanted for Christmas. Right. So how do we talk to all of these groups at one time? Does it make sense to cover that broad of an era, or does it make more sense to 70s, 80s, 90s? Because they're, I don't know, I mean, they're younger. We generally talk about the older people have the money, but the older people also lived through the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yep.
They also have memories there as well, although not nostalgic memories. Like, how do we have a united voice in our marketing and still talk to each group individually?
Sure. Very, very concise description of our challenge. Good job. Had to throw that compliment out there. So I think that the answer is twofold. I think that on the front end, putting things out on social media organically, I think that it's more of a benefit than a detriment that we have a broad audience, and we have content that already kind of lends itself to virality or pretty high engagement. It's like, hey, were you born this year and do you remember this thing? There's a lot of that you can do, that will tap into a large portion of your audience. I don't think that's too alienating because you have enough of it to hit those different portions of your audience, if that makes sense. It's like this whole museum is going to be a content factory. It's like you turn to the left and there's a thing that you can tell a story about how this video game came to be that will apply pretty broadly to a lot of people in your audience, even though it's like not everybody. On the other end, I feel like you could get really, really specific by doing some sort of targeted paid advertising to a quiz where they tell you their birthday and it's like, what 90s product are you? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's like, what loaf of bread are you? But except we're doing it for like generations, like take this quiz to find out, the most nostalgic picture that you'll ever see. And then we'll send it to them. Then we have their name, email, phone number, hopefully their birthday, so that we can send them targeted advertising, email marketing based on their generation. We'll send them new products that we get in. We'll send them, if it's somebody that was born in early 90s or late 80s, we'll send them announcements about the concert that's coming with, whoever's going to be there. I'm trying to think of a 90s artist. I'm blanking right now. Whatever. Britney Spears. Is she late 90s? I don't know.
2000s, maybe.
2000s, yeah. I'm 93, so
I'm
it's like
Hootie and the Blowfish. I mean, I know he's
perfect.
moved
Yeah.
on to other things, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So I'm like 93. So I was a young kid in the 90s, but I'm still a 90s kid, right? I still count. I got in there right under the
I probably count the music from the 90s a bit more of like my music, because
Sure.
that was like teenager music.
Yes.
The 80s music I'm aware of and I have strong nostalgia for it, but it wasn't like when you're a teenager and you're discovering who you are and you're finding yourself through music.
Yep.
Like there's a stronger connection there.
Yeah, I agree with
And that's
that.
the other thing to keep in mind. And so I was born in 78. I don't want the 70s stuff. I want the 80s stuff and I want the 90s stuff. And the 90s stuff. And you can even kind of parse it out and say when a 90s band comes in town, talk to the people that were born in the 70s and 80s, not the people
Exactly.
that were born in the 90s.
Yes.
But if we're going to bring in some toys from the 80s, then we're going to talk to that same group of people. So you've got to be able to kind of pair it up of what part, because your childhood and your teenage years are different. For me, it was different eras, right? It was the world was so different by the time I was a teenager than when I was a kid.
Exactly. And you're trying to, that's what collecting very specific demographic information about people lets you do. You can segment them in your email marketing software. Like this person was born on this date. You can tag them with like, obviously male or female, and like guys were probably more interested in this kind of thing in this decade. And, you can get really, really specific, and you can look at what companies were doing to market to their audience as well in those decades. Like there are ways that you can search what companies were running as far as advertising back then, and you can pull those ads and use them in your own advertising. It's like, do you remember this commercial from the 90s we got these in our museum. You can buy your own.
That would be so cool. That
Oh
would be
man,
so cool to
you
see
could
the
recreate it
commercial
too.
and
Yeah.
know that I can buy it now when I
Yes.
have money, when
Yes.
I couldn't buy it then when I
Oh,
didn't have the money.
that's such a great message. Like, hey, this is
You
that
got
thing that your
money now.
parents never bought you because it was a ridiculous thing. You're grown up. You have grown up money now. Come buy yours. Oh,
Yes.
that's a great idea. Yep.
My very last, I've mentioned before, I don't know if I've mentioned on the podcast, but I was raised Jehovah's Witness, but not until I was 5 or 6. So I remember my last Christmas, and it was this giant strawberry shortcake house. And I remember I was obsessed with it. And I used to say that's how I knew Santa Claus wasn't real, because they brought I got the small strawberry shortcake. When I specifically told Santa Claus, like, I was specific, not the little one, the big one. I want the big strawberry shortcake house. So I'd be like, man, I'm getting that strawberry shortcake house. It's going on my shelf, and
Yep.
I'm getting that thing and we all had, like, well, I don't know, again, like, if these catalogs existed when you were a kid, but we had the Sears catalogs.
Oh yeah.
The Toys R Us catalogs, and you're
100%.
going through and you're circling things. Like, even when we didn't celebrate Christmas, I still had the catalog. And
that is a very vivid memory. Like I remember getting it, circling things, and hiding it and then not telling my parents about some of the things that I asked for to try and figure out if Santa was actually real. Like that's a very early memory where I was like trying to sort it out, and like, if I only tell Santa about these specific things and I get one of them and it's something that I would never actually ask for, I'll know for sure. That's a very early memory.
Great.
Tapped into a core one there.
Yes, no, that's good.
Yeah.
And it was just something about, like, the studying. Like, you just study that entire catalog, and you're bringing in all the colors, and you're imagining yourself and how much fun it's going to be to play with all of these things, just like going to Toys R Us.
Having those magazines there at the museum, oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. Like, and doing like reprints of them that they can take home and circle things in it themselves, or making one for our store. Better yet, making our own magazine that we can do direct mail and send to everybody so they can circle crap in it. And oh man, this is such a fun business.
Oh my gosh, it is. So I like what you saying about the email segmentation, and I totally agree. Man, it's really difficult for me to not say segment the Facebook pages too. Have the 70s Facebook page. You can have the generic one for the store itself, but then you have the ones that are specific for the different nostalgias. Because here's the thing. I am friends with old people on Facebook, people much older than me.
Yeah.
And they post the things like, remember when? And I'm like, no, I don't. And I don't care. I'm irritated by the whole thing, because I'm like, yeah, boomer. Okay, you remember these things, but I just don't care. But the second one comes up that is me. They've got like Gen X checklist right now that's been going around Facebook. Like, you get a point for every single one of these things you've done, and it's a design that you get all the points. Like, there's no way somebody does not get all the points on that. Like, you used a VCR. We all use VCRs.
Yeah, like, everybody did. Yeah.
What you did, like, you used not a microwave, but it was just like generic stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or you remember a time before Game Boys. Yes, obviously, we're Gen X. We remember that time. So the having those checklists and having a page that is just dumping all of that on you, that you're digging in and you're like, yes, I like that band. Yes, I like this and I like that. If you're diluting that over 6 generations or 6 decades, I'm irritated by 60% of these posts. I don't care.
I take your point. I think that that kind of content works really well virally, and niching down to a specific generation would be a really good idea, especially if we were going to do e-commerce and sell things online. That would be good. And I just think that it's a lot if we're staying local, nostalgia museum, and maybe there's a way to tap into the things that are interesting about each generation to different generations. For example, if we're talking about like toys from the 90s, we could say like nostalgia. This is what, 90s kids, do you remember this thing? Also, this company got, the reason this toy disappeared was because their company got acquired by XYZ company, which is now blankety blank and is a $10 billion whatever. And you just tell an interesting story about it. And I think if your copywriting is good enough and the content is good enough that the nostalgia is just a hook for one portion of your audience, and then the copywriting is good enough to entertain everybody else, I think you might be able to get around having to have multiple. But I do understand that it would be a pretty big lift to get all that done. That's like a
Yeah.
lot
You'd
to get
almost
done.
have to have somebody in each department.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right, here is some straight talk. I don't care about the 20s. I don't care about the 50s.
Okay.
I marginally care about the 60s. I guess what I'm saying is, does it make more sense to focus on a bit more of an era
I'm sorry.
than
I feel like we need a shirt that says "Here's some straight talk." I feel like
here's some
that's like a
straight shooting
hashtag "Here's some straight talk." I like
hashtag
that.
straight talk?
Yeah.
No, I feel like just nix the 20s, nix the 50s,
Sure.
maybe nix the 60s, maybe include the 60s, maybe not. But I feel like the world, and it could be very well my perception because I was born at a specific time, but I feel like 70s, 80s, 90s bleed into each other. The 50s was such a different world.
Yep.
I don't necessarily want
TV dinners.
we had TV dinners in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, but not like the 50s. That was the
Yeah.
first TV dinner.
Yeah,
Like the
I
original.
agree. But I think that here's the difference. I think that there is so much they have entire TV channels that are based on TV shows from the 50s and 60s and bringing
Well,
that nostalgia back.
to me, that's the
Wants
reason we
people
do it.
else.
That's the reason we do it, right? It's like the
I
the
know.
the need, the urge, the emotion is there. Like we're just capitalizing on it. I want some of that market share, Allie. I want to scrape some of those people that love the 50s and bring them into our nostalgia museum.
Then they're going to want the 40s. Oh my gosh. It's like terrible.
No, I agree with you. I think that here's what we do. Here's what we do. We say, hey, were you born between this year and this year? We have a nostalgia museum specifically for you, right? And we have maybe the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? That's our focus. We have the very specific rooms, very specific things for that. And then we have kind of like space for a pop-up where we do like rotations of other things that we think would be cool, right? So
I think that's fine. I can be okay with that.
yeah, so and the reason I think that might be cool is because there are speakeasy bars. There's like
Mhm.
speakeasy themed bars right now that you can go in. Literally, we walked by one of them the other night in downtown Fort Myers. It's like there's a guy in there playing a wash tub bass and doing trumpet with his mouth. And there's like a washboard, like it's just people want to experience something different than what they see every day. And like if you can package that and give them an experience where they walk in and the guy behind the counter has a cool handlebar mustache and suspenders and you got the wall of liquor and everybody's being hushed tones, like I think people want that. People crave something that's
I
different.
I agree with that. I think it's a different business.
Sure.
I think that it's not necessarily we're going in there because we remember. We're
Mhm.
going in there because it's a different experience. Because
Sure.
nobody's remembering the 20s at this point in time,
Correct.
right? My grandma's 88. She was born in 35.
Yeah.
Like nobody's remembering that. So I think the 20s themselves is a whole different business.
Yep.
And you could totally build like a restaurant / bar. I like the speakeasy idea. I love all of that.
All right. I take your point. I think you're right. And we should focus on the generations that have the energy, the money, and the time to go experience these kinds of things. And like the time part of it can be, maybe they have, they've grown up and they have jobs and they get vacation time, or they have kids and they're looking for things to do with their kids. Like that's like the sweet spot right now for the nostalgia. And I think you're right. We should focus on that. That
I do too. And I think that, again, like I would almost like there could be a separate, I'm being so bad, but there could be a separate building for the old people. They're not bringing down our vibe, man. Like I see that and I think old,
yeah,
right? But I see
yeah.
stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I think that's me.
Yes, I
Right.
get
And
that.
I
Yeah.
just I don't want to try to be talking to them at the same time we're trying to talk to Gen X
Yep.
and millennials who have just a very different experience of the world. And by the way, is a much more consumeristic era,
Yep.
group of decades where, I mean, we watched, there's there's a show on Netflix that talks about like the toys we grew up with or
Love
something
that
like.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, and it talks about how the boon of these toys and their heyday, and the heyday is like 80s.
Yep.
80s. That's when the toys were. That's when the video games came out. That's when things just changed. And again, like I can see some 70s in there too, because that was kind of the birth of things like Star Wars.
Yeah. Hmm.
Like Rainbow Bright might have been in the 70s. I'm not sure. So like there's certain things like started in the 70s and then it just took off in the 80s. And then the 90s went full on consumerism,
Mm.
like full on the McDonald's toys and just all of the things, like when you get the ball pits in the McDonald's,
Yeah.
right? Like they're trying to attract the families and they have all, all the toys and all the things. And then in the 2000s, it just kind of gets so watered down.
A little muddy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that though in the beginning of the 2000s, you still have some of those like pop icons, and you get some of that carryover from the late 90s. But it's not to say that we can't have an NSYNC concert or
Sure.
whatever.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if Britney Spears wants to come and perform, I think
Come
it's
down,
like,
Brittany. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then
No, I
there's,
love
there's
that.
a cutoff, right? Like
Yeah.
this isn't Kim Kardashian. We're not talking about that kind of nonsense.
Not talking about
We're
influencers.
Kim Kardashian's dad in the OJ trial. That's
Yes.
where we're living at. I
Yeah.
remember that. I was in high school when that happened.
Yeah. We're
Um,
pre-influencer.
yeah. So the pre-internet, a lot of it. I mean, not that the internet wasn't around, but it was not anywhere near what we see today. It wasn't what YouTube was 2003, I think.
Yeah,
I
and I
just
feel
read the
like
other day.
I feel like there's a this idea. I feel like maybe it's cyclical, right? Like I feel like everything's cyclical, right? So like we're hitting kind of this weird saturation point where pop culture isn't really a thing, and there's like everybody's an influencer and everybody has access to everything, and technology and knowledge, it's all just kind of so saturated that it's too much. And I think it's going to swing back the other direction, and I think that we're going to get this same kind of nostalgia, this longing for a time before things got complicated, for the early internet era. And I think that when those kids grow up, which we're growing up, right? It's like there's going to be a wave of that, like meme culture, and
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean?
Vine. Yeah.
Vine, yeah. I think we're going to hit this same thing for that, but it's going to be another whatever 10, 20 years. So we're going to open
Yeah.
another one of these in 10, 20 years
Well,
for the
that's it.
early
The whole thing
2000s.
has to evolve. It's just like when you listen to a radio station that plays the oldies.
Yeah.
They're playing different songs on the oldies stations now than they played when I listened to the oldies station. So I was listening to oldies in the 90s. I was listening to the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yep.
80s was not oldies. 80s is now oldies. Like 80s
Yeah.
is now older music. 90s even is older music. Like it's not
Yep.
the oldies, and that like oldies kind of has its own category.
Yeah.
But I'm as far removed. So if I'm listening to the oldies in the 90s and I'm listening to music from the 70s is included in oldies, and now I'm 20 years later, that music from the 90s is now oldies music. It's
Yep.
it's
And
the same space.
there's something to be said there also for the shrinking and expansion of people's perception of time. And we're getting a little bit meta here, but like
No, I think it's
in
great.
yeah, in the 80s, I don't know, I wasn't born yet, but my understanding of
I can tell you a little bit about the 80s.
of people's perception of things in the 80s, you would look at a car that came out in 1972 and you would say that's a classic. It's like a classic muscle car, right? So like a 1972 Barracuda, 71 Barracuda. I don't know a lot about cars either, but it's like that was a classic even in the
Mhm.
80s when like new muscle cars were coming out. And I think I think that was like a short amount of time, right? Like whatever, 10 years. You'd have classic cars and it's only been 10 years. I think now it's like everything is shortened because of how easy it is to access everything and everybody's bombarded by all this information from different decades. And you can listen to music from, you know, the 20s right now. You could just pull it up on your phone. That wasn't a thing
Right,
before.
right.
So I think that people's access to information has really shortened their perception of time. So like
Mhm.
oldies and classics are way way back for
They
people.
still feel very far away.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for that as well. It's like even though the 90s aren't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, like it's getting to the point where it's like classic and oldies and whatever, even if we don't call it that. And that's why we're tapping into the nostalgia. It's like we want
Right,
that
right,
time
right.
back.
Yeah, so we
Radio.
don't want to call it oldies,
No.
right?
No.
It because we also are in a generation that doesn't want to feel old, doesn't want to act old, doesn't want to
Mhm.
act like we're adults, don't want to dress like adults. We don't want to be boring like adults.
Yep.
People in my generation, people in their 40s are getting new tattoos and they're getting motorcycles and they're dressing and they're wearing the t-shirts from bands they liked back in the day,
Yep.
where my mom and dad didn't do that. By the time they were in their 40s, they were very well established American citizens, so with
Yep.
good paying jobs and a mortgage, you know what
Yep.
I mean?
Yep.
And I think Gen X definitely pushes against that, and millennials even more so. Like, I'm not getting old. Like, don't tell me I'm getting old. I'm not going to be like those old people I remember. You know, I was just talking to my grandma the other day, and my grandma was my age when I was born.
Mm.
And I was like, man, you were so old, you know? And of course, kids always look at adults and think they're old, but they acted older then,
Yes.
you
Yep.
know, that generations now don't want to. So I think that that nostalgia is also kind of a way of claiming our independence from the system.
Yes.
But at the same time, it was the system that fed us all these commercial products and TV shows, but it made us feel more individualized and more unique and special and different and
And
all
that's
of that.
great marketing, right? It's like you give you it just points to how products and consumerism and marketing can shape culture, right? It's like you can tell people what they want. It's like they don't know what they want, and like your
Yep.
job as a marketer is to tell them what they want, or what they want to avoid and how they can avoid it. It's like you don't want to look old, so make sure you wear this '90s merch,
Yep.
right? So that tapping into that, it's such a powerful thing. It's so powerful, in fact, that it can shape an entire generation of people. Like yeah,
I love kind of doing like a photo shoot and be like, not your grandma's clothing store, and have like women in there that are grandmas. Like, I'm old enough, I could be a grandma. Like, technically, I have two children that could give me grandkids right now
Hmm.
if they so desired. Thankfully, they don't. But there are women younger than me that are grandmas. And we all think of what a grandma dresses like, what a grandma looks like, and just to be like, not your grandma's clothing store, or this grandma's clothing store, or something like that, that like, this is how grandmas dress now, and have them
Yes,
in New
yep,
Kids on the Block t-shirts,
yep.
or whatever it is, or In Sync, or I can't. Boy bands in the 90s weren't, who was in the 90s? There
98
weren't a lot.
degrees.
Yeah, that was like late 90s into 2000s.
That's me, right?
Yeah.
That's what I can reference. I'm like in
So
sync, 98 degrees,
it
Backstreet
would have
Boys.
been like New Kids on the Block was, I think, early
Sure,
90s.
you had
If I
like
were to think
R
about
and
it.
B, like Boys to Men.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of stuff.
Run DMC.
Great.
Like, everybody wants a Run DMC t-shirt, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
I can see it. I remember the t-shirt. I know
hmm
what it looks like. I
hmm
remember my New Kids on the Block t-shirt. Like,
Yep.
I remember my Reese Cup t-shirt.
Yeah.
We used to also get Far Side cartoon
Yeah.
t-shirt. That was
Yep.
like real popular for a while. I had a couple of those. But yeah, it's rebelling. It's not it's not becoming old, not becoming an adult, not falling into what we saw our parents as stodgy,
Old.
Old.
Yep. Yep. I'm on
Boomers.
board.
Like it just needs to be called like okay boomer. That's what we need to call this.
Oh no.
Okay, boomer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like
Married
it.
to a boomer. I have like the immunity idol. I'm allowed to say it.
No, I love this idea. I'm really excited about it for a lot of reasons, and like I say every episode, we're gonna get off this call here, and we are
We
gonna
got to
go
start one.
file the paperwork. We're gonna come up with a business name, and we're gonna start this thing.
Okay, boomer. I'm telling you, it's
I
okay.
love that.
So I think the way I'm envisioning it now, after bringing up Bass Pro Shop,
Sure.
not so much rooms but sections,
Yep.
right? And if you have, let's say it's 70s, 80s, 90s, not that I'm cramming that idea down anybody's throat. I'm just saying, let's say it's 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Okay.
All of those things will kind of flow into, I mean, you definitely want segments, but they won't feel extremely disconnected from each other.
Sure.
We don't have like Roy Rogers and that sort of thing. But we have, the 70s goes into 80s, 80s goes into 90s. It's going to feel like a natural flow. It's more open. You've got these restaurants at different ends. You've got a big stage in the middle where you have a dance floor where people can either dance or they stand and listen to the music. But you can hear the music from anywhere in the store.
Yep.
And then you've got I love the idea of like, so this is something I've talked about we have our 50th family reunion coming up. And in my family, the family reunion's like a big deal.
Yep.
I come from a pretty large family. My dad was one of 11.
Wow.
And a bunch of them had a bunch of kids, and a bunch of them had a bunch of kids. So there's a lot of people in our family. Reunion's a big deal, and it's the 50th anniversary. And I had thrown out there, I think what I want to do is just go buy an Atari game, a console with a bunch of games, and then hook it up to a TV. And that's like one of the activities we do, because all my cousins that are my age, we're going to flip out over that. We're going to flip out. And I like the idea of doing it on the old TV, but I also love the idea of doing it on a big TV, because our TV for our Atari was like this big. You know how awesome it would be if we could play Pitfall on a screen this big and be like, it's like, this is how it was always meant to be.
Well, I mean, you could have you could have a wall in the place that you project those games onto, and people can sign up to have time to play on it.
Yes.
That would be great. Yeah.
And then what do people like to do? They like to watch gamers do stuff. So everybody stands around and watches this person play whatever Asteroid or Pitfall or Pac-Man or anything like that.
Yep.
They can do it right there. And then you have to have an arcade.
Yep.
Of some sort. You got to have the arcade with the old games in it. Our game was called Megazone that we had in the basement of our house. We had an old arcade game. And I actually went on YouTube to watch somebody play Megazone. Because I'm like, what happens after you get past that part? Because ours was kind of broken, and the joystick didn't work really well, so we couldn't get to the next level. Turns out it just repeats the level forever. Like you just repeat all 4 levels, and it just gets slightly harder each time. But then it gets to a point where it doesn't even get harder.
Yep.
And you just keep going for forever. It literally never
Indefinitely.
ends. Yeah. But that was the kind of stuff, like, I have dreams about that game. I literally dream about the game and what happens on the next level. So yeah, having the arcades there, there's so much you can do with it. The candy, like I said, the food. What kind of food would you serve for like 70s, 80s, 90s if we're focusing there? Like, I think when we talk food, there's always like this jump to like bellhop, old burger joint from the 50s. But 70s, 80s, and 90s, what kind of food are we having? You gotta look back and see like what was the cheese balls or something like that.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that I am not big on, because I've never been huge about food. Like, I was picky growing up, so I didn't eat a lot of different things. But I remember very specifically like seeing for the first time food that you could get from the grocery store shaped like cartoon characters. So you could
Mm,
get like macaroni shaped like your favorite Nickelodeon people and things like that. It's a lot of that kind of stuff that's based around the pop culture stuff that's going on.
mm-hmm.
Um, and there are a lot of stories of brands trying to make something work and it not working, like the clear Pepsi.
Right.
Like there's a lot of that kind of stuff. There was like purple Heinz ketchup that was a thing for a while. There's
Remember the
kind of,
green ketchup? They just talked about that on Unwrapped. There
yeah,
was
green
green ketchup.
ketchup.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff like that that I think you could incorporate into the menu. And like maybe we have like a food court that serves all these different things at it, as opposed to, I don't know if there's
Separate.
enough. Yeah, I don't know if there's like enough to have one for each. There probably is, but
Well, this
maybe,
is a big business where we're going to make lots of money. We can make it exactly how we want it to. But I
true.
don't mind a food court either. And I can envision the kinds of things. Oh my gosh, we should have cafeteria food. We need to have the old square pizzas.
Ooh, great idea. We'll have
That
like
would
the
be
tiny little milk cartons and like, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great idea.
no, that would be so good. Salisbury steak.
Yep.
And oh my gosh, there's a lot
School
of
school
there's
cafeteria food. Yep.
yeah, and we serve it on the cafeteria plates.
Oh man.
And then we have other options that are other foods that were popular. So let's say like rugrat shaped macaroni and cheese. So
We could
you can
even
get
have the
something.
school lunch, like the tables for people to sit at. Oh man, this is a great idea.
I love it. No, this is so great. A cafeteria style with square pizza. Oh, also, do you remember Tony's pizzas? Did you guys have those in your school? They were
Maybe.
popular in general.
Mm,
They were these round, like little mini deep dish pizzas that you
mm,
could pay extra for and get them at school. But they were in the stores and they were really popular at the time.
huh.
You could do Tony's pizzas. You could do Choco Tacos. I know that was like one of the extra dessert type things you could buy at the time. And then you have it cafeteria style where you have your tray and you just choose what cafeteria food and or additional food products that your mom would serve at home, like fish sticks.
Yep.
Who has fish sticks anymore? Like that should be an option.
Dinosaur shaped chicken nuggets.
Dinosaur shaped chicken nuggets. That's what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I'm in.
Yep, I am too. There's got to be more.
Yeah, the food
It's
is
killing me.
that's a weak point in my research. I didn't frankly I didn't do any research at all. I'm relying on my memory of the late '90s, which is shaky at best. So
Yeah, you were like what in the late '90s? You were like 6.
7, yeah,
Yeah,
6 or
there you
7.
go.
Yeah,
So I was all the way through the '80s and then all the way through the '90s. But again, like I can't think of like foods other than like fast food was such a big deal at the time.
yep, mhm,
White Castle burgers, which are still around, but you
yep.
don't really see the. Is there a White Castle restaurant around here
I
anywhere?
think that we
You
may
know?
have gotten one very recently, but it's not close. I think I
Okay.
saw someone talking about making a pilgrimage to White Castle. But yeah,
Because
White
Tim's
Castle's
never had
fine.
White Castle, and I'm
Mm.
like, oh, we should just totally go
Yeah,
like
White
pay.
Castle's good. We
Yeah,
we
White
stopped at
Castle.
one, I think, on the way to Orlando. Maybe. Don't quote me on that.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pilgrimage. Orlando, you got to
Yeah.
go up that way. I don't know if I'm willing to commit that far, but if we had to go up that way, I would
Well,
definitely
we're
go.
gonna have it at our nostalgia
Yeah,
museum.
we'll have it at our store.
We'll have it at OK Boomer.
But that's the cool thing is with the food then, and I think this is again one of the things that restaurants get so wrong. You have your staples, right?
Yep.
But you got to bring in some cool stuff and have specials that are actually interesting and cool.
Yes.
And so if you announce ahead of time that you're going to have White Castle burgers there Thursday only,
Mm.
then everybody that wants White Castle burgers shows up for Thursday to get the White Castle burgers because that's what they want.
Yes.
It gives you something to announce. It's the same with the bands, right? It gives you something to announce. It gives people a reason to show up.
Yep.
So if you can announce that you're going to have White Castle burgers, if you're going to announce like it's a taco salad day and do like an old school taco salad.
Yes. Yep.
I was
And all
also
the
thinking,
kids at school would be like, it's blank day. It's whatever day at lunch today. Did you hear? Like,
yes, 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 yes,
yes.
it's pizza day or
Yeah.
it's macaroni and cheese day or
Yep.
whatever it is,
Yep.
and just get that nasty macaroni and cheese,
Oh
and
man,
then
so
have
good.
some good macaroni and cheese at the same time.
Yep.
And the little ice cream cups,
Yep.
little ice cream cups. um, yeah, I've got like so many ideas for cafeteria food.
Yep.
But yeah, you just tell them like it's White Castle Day at the thing. There used to be these little cakes that we made that keep popping up into my head, and maybe somebody listening to this can remember what it was. It was like called Tierra cakes.
Hmm.
I believe it was in the 80s, late 80s probably. And I remember they had these very specific molds, and you had to get I think it was called a Tierra, something like that. Tierra cake, you had to get the specific mold, and you had to have the specific mix that goes in that. You can't just make a Tierra cake from scratch. You got to
Sure.
buy this very fancy mix. And then there was like maybe some caramel or something in it. And you put the caramel in the mold first, and then the cake mix, and then you flip it out, and it's a Tierra cake.
Wow.
And it was like a big deal. Everybody wanted to have these Tierra cakes. I remember my sister was like, woo, 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 like we're making Tierra cakes, right? Or whatever they were called. It was something like that.
Yeah.
Somebody listening to this, I'm sure, remembers what these things are.
Yep.
But we'll have a Tierra cake day too.
Yeah. I just like attach. I have so many more like memories attached to things. I have like the
Sure.
very clear image of that thing that's like it's a you put a piece of paper in it and you press a button and it like spins the paper
Mhm.
and then you can drip paint on it and it makes like this cool.
I never
Oh
had
my
one.
god, I wanted one so bad. I was like, this is the only thing I'll ever ask for. Please, I'll never ask for a Christmas
Did
present
you never
again.
get one?
I don't remember. You know, it's one of
I
the
think it's the toys we missed. I never had a light bright.
Yep.
And I thought a light bright would be fantastic. I never had an Etch a Sketch.
Yeah.
The only time I could play Etch a Sketch was when we went to like the doctor's office and they'd have
Yeah.
an Etch a Sketch there, and I'd quickly like try to figure out how to learn how to use the Etch a Sketch so I can make something really quickly.
Yeah.
The light bright Etch a Sketch. It's the toys that we didn't end up with, because I think that you hold those up on the pedestal because
Yes.
you never actually got it to realize that it was kind of lame actually.
Yep.
So you still hold it in this high regard that you could have had it. We had the ones where you could take the different plates and you put them together. It would maybe make like Barbie's outfit or something like that. And you would mix and match the plates and you put the paper over it and you hit it with the crayon and it makes a thing.
Yep.
That's a good one too.
I'll definitely do some more research on 90s foods though, because that's killing me now. I feel like I should remember more, but
I feel like I should too. Like the Tierra cake is a big thing I'm coming up with. I remember the taco salad specifically from Taco Bell. And again, they may still have them there, but there was something special about them at the time. They must have just come out with them.
yeah, good marketing.
And then school lunches.
Yeah.
School lunches. Choco Taco, Tony's Pizza, and Square Nasty. There's got to be a factory that makes Square Nasty pizzas that we can contract with.
That's the beauty of this. Like, we'll just buy it from the same distributors that the schools buy it from. Like, dirt cheap, bad for you. Oh, it's great.
That means we're going to have to name the business something that sounds like a school.
Ooh.
So we can put the order into the cafeteria place and they'll be like, oh, such and such school.
Yep.
They need some Square pizzas. Let's send them some Square pizzas.
What are we going to do with all this garbage pizza? Oh, luckily another school opened up.
They're buying like tons of the stuff. It was terrible pizza and I loved it. It was the most exciting thing when it was pizza
day. Yeah. It's again, it points to something. It points to how powerful the psychology of marketing is, and like when you understand it, you can sell things that everybody agrees are horrible. It's like we all know that the pizza's bad, but people are still going to come buy it because we want to relive that experience. Did you ever have in school where I went to maybe a middle school, elementary school, where they had cups on the table that were red, yellow, and green, and they would flip them over if you were being too loud. It would be on green, and you could all just kind of like talk and do your thing. And then if you were a little too loud, they would flip the yellow cup on top, and then if it was red, you had to be quiet or you were going to get in trouble. Did you ever have that?
No.
Maybe we were just bad kids. I don't know.
No,
But
you guys had much more creative. Like even when my kids went to school, the little bit of time that they went to school, it was just way more creative the way that the teachers interacted with and communicated with the kids.
sure.
Um, for us, it was like they said, "Be quiet," and that was the hardest rule for me to follow.
Yeah,
That
me
was
too.
usually when I got in trouble was because I was talking.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's lunch. They would have us be quiet at lunchtime.
Yeah, it's
I'm
like
like,
that's the
that is
time to
so.
talk.
I know. Like, when else are we supposed to have these conversations? We're not allowed to talk literally at any other time.
Yeah, we're here to develop social skills, right? Like you got to
Yeah.
talk somewhere, But
I can have a whole conversation about social still. Maybe one of these days I talked to Mariah about Sudbury schools.
yep,
We should have a whole conversation one time about like if we started a school, what would the school look like?
I've
If
actually
that
been thinking the same thing. Like I've been thinking about that just based on some of the clients that I'm working with. Like there's such a huge opportunity there to disrupt, right? Like that's
yes.
when, talking about business in general, it's like you're looking for an industry that is ripe for disruption. You can go in
Yeah.
and do something that like shakes it all up and flips everybody else on their head and it's like this is a new better way to do it. Huge opportunity for business. And I think
Yeah.
education is like right on that
Oh,
tipping point.
there's got to be a radical change.
Yes.
Something has to change radically.
Yep.
The whole system is falling apart.
From bottom to top, like
No, it's
literally from
crumbling.
public school to college institution, like
Yep.
higher education. It's all corrupt.
Yep.
It's all broken. So I think we're going to see a huge shift. I think we're already
Yep.
seeing it, right? Like I think we're already seeing the trend toward online education and like taking your education into your own hands and learning the things that you want to learn with people that already went through the school system. They're like, yeah, obviously I didn't learn anything I needed to learn there. So they're taking it into their own hands now.
Mhm.
And I think you're going to see it earlier and earlier and earlier. People are going to be saying, no, we're going to choose where our kids go. We're not just going to follow what everybody else is doing. So big opportunity there.
Opting out big time. We opted out. We just opted out of the entire system and said that we're not going to subject our children to this.
Yep.
And I think that kids even mentally are opting out now. And it used to be in the past, if you wanted knowledge, you had to go to school to get it because it wasn't available anywhere else.
Like that.
That is not the world we live in anymore. Anybody with a phone has more access to information than we had in the entire library at our school library times a million. Like it's not even close. And so we definitely need to do an episode on that because I've built schools in my head many times. Than what I wanted to see for my kids, what I wanted, what I thought would also solve the problem of what, because not everybody can homeschool. They can't be home with their kids all day.
Yeah.
They have jobs, they have things they need to do. So how do we do it in a way that it's school, but unschool school? So in the meantime, before we do that episode, you need to go look up Sudbury schools.
Okay.
And just maybe find some YouTube videos on it because they're super interesting. They don't have, but see, here's the thing. My kids will not have school nostalgia.
Yep.
I have school nostalgia.
Me too.
I also have school trauma. My kids don't have school trauma.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're trading things off. But I think that's where we're going with this lack of culture is because we're not institutionalized anymore. Not the way that we used to be. It used to be that we were spoon-fed what was going to be in, what is out, what is popular, what is not. And now it's cool to be a nerd, right? It wasn't cool to be a nerd back in the day. You being interested in something like Dungeons and Dragons would have made you a social outcast. Now the cool kids are playing Dungeons and Dragons and the nerdy kids are into football. Like everything is like melding together, and the separations between people even are, I mean, politics aside and all of that, but like as far as your interests and your hobbies and that sort of thing, you have the ability to have multiple hobbies and interests and not risk yourself socially. You can have a favorite YouTuber and not need to follow what's happening in Hollywood because you're living vicariously through their channel.
Yep.
You said you think it's going to swing back. I don't know how. And I'm probably just limited. I don't know how it swings back to where we are unified behind certain cultural ideas.
Sure. So I would argue that it's less a unification and um, more of a pull toward uh, individuality, right? So like that's what we're
Mhm.
doing now is we're like pulling more toward um, being able to choose our own destiny and being able to define what we think is cool, right? It's not just what society says it is. And the more you pull for individuality and individualism, there is an equal and opposite reaction toward tribalism, right? Like people are
Right.
naturally tribal, and I think that the more individual people become, the more will society will start to crave those tribes, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, I definitely see the tribes,
Mm.
absolutely, and I think that's kind of what's happening now with things like TTRPGs
Sure.
and an ability for people to come together around a central idea, um, play together, get to know each other. It's just now it's possible for the nerd to have a tribe
Yeah.
where it used to be really difficult. And we talked about this in the pet store episode that, I didn't have a tribe growing up of people who understood my love and passion for animals and wanting to learn about animals and wanting to interact with animals. And just like my obsession with animals, I was weird and outcast and set aside and forced into the mainstream if I wanted to be considered a person anybody else wanted to be around, right?
Sure.
Because otherwise they're like, why? My Saturday nights were spent over a microscope and pond water.
Yeah.
Like that's what I wanted to do. And I had nobody around me that was like that. But with the internet, I can instantly have a tribe of those people. All I have to do is look for the right Facebook group. And I can have friends and I can have community. Even though we're not meeting in person, I'm
Sure.
able to find my people in a way that I wasn't before.
Yeah. I would again not argue. I would
Oh, you can argue with me. That's fine.
fine. I
Tell
would
me I'm
argue.
wrong,
Mm,
then prove it
well, it's like
with data.
yeah. Yeah. So I think that you would even agree that within those communities, you'll see the tendency to um, the hallmarks of a tribe are like this is what we say is cool, and we're all going to self-identify as this tribe because these are the things that we value as good and right and cool. And like that's the same thing that um, was happening before the internet when we were all separated at a cultural level, and it was just determined by pop culture and by media and by so like
Big
really all we're
corporation.
doing, yes, yeah, really all we're doing is like allowing the shift is like we're allowing individual people to choose and find their own tribe, and the swing back the other direction is like within each of those things you'll get that same tribalism. I don't know if society as a whole will ever swing back to like this kind of person is this because we're too connected now, but within
Well, I mean,
those tribes that's kind
I
of
think that's already happening. I think that if you're in I look at the rabbit toy business, right? There are definitely hierarchies. There are subgroups. There are ins and outs. There are the people that are everybody loves and the people that everybody kind of makes fun of behind their back. I set up at an event where it was a rabbit related event, and the gossiping and like the backbiting about this person and that person
yeah.
within this tiny little community.
Yeah, you're like everybody
And
knows each other, like can't we just be
yeah,
cool? Yeah.
yeah, and they all have the same interests. So yeah, it's happening on a microcosm in these individual, because we're people.
Yeah.
We're people, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
I think I'm cooler than some other people. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like I don't like to think of myself that way, but I definitely do. We last episode ragged on people that have marketing degrees and like they don't know what they're doing. Like we all have that instinct to do it.
Yeah.
But I think you're right though that ended on a grand scale with a unifying message that ended around the 90s, early 2000s.
Yep.
And the fact that you and I can both remember square pizza, right? You're in Florida, I'm in Ohio. 15 years between us, and we both remember square pizzas because we both came up around the same time. We have a lot of the same cultural references to each other that kids these days may not have because they're not consuming the same media.
Yep.
They're not going to the same kinds of schools. There's so much more variety available to them that what's the most popular fast food joint that everybody wants to go to? I don't know. Like there's no leader anymore like there used to be.
Yeah, there's room for, it's kind of like there's room for everybody. It's
Yep.
like anybody that has any interest in anything, you can find your people and you can find someone to serve whatever that need or that
Yep.
market is. Yeah,
And
it's
that's
pretty.
always a good business, is to serve that
Yeah,
niche.
yeah,
Those
it's pretty
hungry, hungry
insane
people.
how niche you can get. Like
Mhm.
uh, crochet, right, as an example. But within crochet,
Mosaic crochet.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to say. Within crochet, something that's already niche, getting even more niche to a specific kind of crochet. It's like you
And
would,
then hers is even more specific
yeah,
because she only does one type of that specific kind of mosaic crochet.
exactly. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy to me. It's crazy to me in a lot of ways, but it's still to me points to that same cyclical nature, right? So like you do that long enough and you get down to an individual person. Like this individual person likes this specific type of crochet niche within a niche, and they only use this type of yarn, and they only use this type of crochet hook, and they only crochet on Sundays because that's when they have time to crochet. You know what I mean? So like you kind of, the smaller and more specific you get down to the individual. And I think the more that happens, the more you'll see larger kind of tribal shifts in society. Like it'll be like a swing back toward large crochet groups because it becomes too niche. Does that make
Right.
sense? Yeah.
And it's also lonely. You don't have any community if you're being served. The thing I thought of when you're like, you get down to the individual and what exactly they like. And I'm like, that's what they made OnlyFans for.
Yeah. Very niche. Yeah.
Really, like I watched a documentary about that, and like this woman has like one supporter,
Yep.
and all she has to do is make him happy, and he's paying all of her bills. Like
Yep.
you can get really niche down there.
Really niche. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was listening to a podcast about just a business podcast that I like, and they were talking about how people are buying channels from OnlyFans creators and saying all you have to do is create content and send it to us, and we'll manage it, and we'll just pay you a percentage of everything that comes in. And I'm like, that's crazy. So you could just like build a brand. It's like any other business. You build a media company and you just sell it to these people, and there are people rolling up OnlyFans creator businesses. I'm like, it's like you see these repeated patterns in a lot of different industries, and
Hmm.
that's a great way to, if we're just talking general business, like see something that's happening somewhere else that hasn't happened in a niche yet. You're like, I'm just
Hmm.
going to take that business model and bring it over here.
Yep.
Same thing with marketing. It's like, take this marketing idea, bring it over here, do it
Yep.
for this market, and they've never seen it, so it blows their mind and works like crazy. So, yep, fascinating.
Love it. Love it. All right. So, okay, Boomer,
Yeah.
the nostalgia are the clubhouse for the millennial generation. I don't know, something like
Yeah,
that.
we'll work on a sub headline.
Well,
I
we'll
like
work on
Okay
it.
Boomer.
Names are tough.
I
Names are tough.
I like Okay Boomer. We just got to work on the colon, what comes after that.
Yes. Yeah. What's our qualifier? Okay,
Yes.
Boomer.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I like that. I think it's a winner. I just think I don't have anything really else to say. Like you said, with the fun businesses, they almost market themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody listening to this that is of those generations, of our generation, or maybe a little bit older, instantly sees the appeal of this sort of business.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to convince anybody. You don't have to be fancy in your marketing. You can be fancy in your marketing and you can absolutely crush it.
Mm-hmm.
But you could be super lazy in your marketing and still do really, really well. As long as your location is clean, as long as it stays fresh as far as the things that you're bringing in, as long as your staff is good, you can pretty much just like be blindfolded and run a business like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But you bring, just like anything else, if you can just do more than the bare minimum, if you can segment those lists, if you can be creative in the types of entertainment that you bring in, if you can be creative about the types of events that you bring in, if you can even get creative about the merch itself. You know, we talked about having that more subtle way of saying like, hey, I'm a Disney fan or Studio Ghibli or whatever it is, as well as the loud way. I just think that it's wowing people, right? Keeping them engaged. And when they walk in, their jaw drops. And all I want to see, my only goal is to see people's jaw drop and say, oh, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the money.
Yep.
That's the money. Oh my gosh. And bringing their girlfriends with them or their friends with them and saying, we're going to go out together and we're going to go to OK Boomer and we're going to check out, they're having an Atari, like they're having an Atari championship thing going on
Mm.
there. And they've got a band playing and we're going to get square pizza and wait till the new t-shirts they just got in.
Yes. Yeah.
Like that you can accomplish that if you can create those conversations.
That's it.
Like hashtag winning.
Hashtag winning. Hashtag grind set mindset. I think that is really important too. Like that moment of like, oh wow. You know, it doesn't just have to be for nostalgia. Oh wow, I remember that. It can be, oh wow, I can't believe that, like our last episode, this bank has a 900-gallon goldfish tank. Oh wow, I can't believe this person just brought me a coffee at a bank when I sat down in this like reclining electric massage chair. Like, oh wow, those little moments, you can make those in any business, and it helps attach that feeling to your business. That's what you want. You want to create as many of those moments as you can throughout the customer experience, no matter what niche or industry you're in, and the opportunity's there, right? Like it's not that hard to find those things in your business if you really sit down and think about it.
I think I heard somewhere, and I might just be making this up, but I know it's true, but how it was said, I'm probably just making it up.
Weighing it.
But basically, like a memory or a feeling solidifies a memory.
Sure.
Having a feeling about the business that you go into, it may be a bad feeling and you don't want to go back, but it's going to solidify that I don't want to go there. I feel that way about Burger King. I don't know why. I have a bad association with Burger King. I think as a kid, I had some bad fries there. They were stale or cold or something.
Sure.
And I'm like, Burger King, not good. I don't want to go. And so Burger King, like I've eaten there once as an adult that I can remember of. Just don't want to go. I'm going to choose McDonald's over Burger King. Why? Because my mom took us to McDonald's after things that we did. We went to the mall, shopping at the mall. We got to go to McDonald's afterwards. We went to McDonald's. I have that positive memory associated with McDonald's. We got a little toy when we were there. The pretty golden arches. You got the little box, the little Happy Meal box, right?
Yep.
So we remember the things that create a feeling, and too many people create businesses that create no feeling.
Mm-hmm. No feeling,
It's not so much you're trying to avoid a bad feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You've never tried to create a good feeling, so you're bland.
It's kind of neutral. Yeah.
Neutral.
Yeah, and like that good feeling can really come from you. Like if you're a solopreneur and you have a small business, the feeling can literally be how your interactions with these people go, right? Like I have something simple like a client gift. Like get them something that you see when you're out shopping that makes you think of them, and you're like, man, this client would really love this. Get it for them, bring it to them, and drop it off in person, especially if it's like a recurring kind of service business where you don't see them that often, don't think about that often. You still need to be in touch with them regularly so that they remember you and think of you in a good way. And giving them a gift is like, oh wow, it's one of those moments. Like it's so nice that they thought of me to do this. But yeah, definitely try to not be neutral. Like neutral is better than bad. But definitely.
I don't know. Some people are just bad and they're really rich.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, the bad, that's something we haven't really like tapped into yet. You can market in a way we did a little bit in the divorce lawyer one, right?
Yeah.
Like you can market in a way that alienates an entire group of people and
But it
says like,
tracks.
yeah, I am
Yeah.
this is my ideal client. Maybe I've seen it done with political beliefs, like don't shop here if you're a
Absolutely.
Democrat. It's like, what are you talking about? You'd think that would be crazy, but it's like, no,
Mhm.
no, this is the Republican or whatever
We
brand.
know that store.
Yeah, yeah,
We know that store.
we are familiar with this brand. Yeah. Um, but and like you can even do it in ways that aren't necessarily overt, right? So like Black Rifle Coffee is a great example of that. They're like American made, um, you know, they do a lot of like guns and military, and like that's their whole brand is Black
Mhm.
Rifle Coffee. And like that's very appealing to a very specific demographic. I'm not saying they're alienating anybody, but people that don't like guns aren't going to like any of their marketing material. It's just kind
Right.
of the way that it works.
Right.
So you can like plant your flag. That's what I think of it as. It's like you can plant your flag on a specific belief or thing that people align with, and it can be very powerful. That speaks to that ideal client as well.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be like, hey, Southwest Florida business owners, like some of my marketing is. It can be like in a little more subtle in your messaging and your branding.
Sure. And it's that polarizing, right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
polarizing where there's this or that. And I think that's
Yeah.
bad for society,
Yep.
but unfortunately it works really, really well. It works for marketing. And that's why we always talk about, or we've talked about it before, about like do no evil, do no harm,
Mm-hmm.
like try not to do things that are bad for people.
Yep.
But at the same time, almost everything is polarizing to some extent,
Yep.
right? The boomers aren't going to like okay boomer.
Nope.
And that's part of the appeal to the Gen X and the millennials is like, a big F you to the boomers, right? Um, even the rabbit toy the rabbit toy business, my rabbit toy business is polarizing to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
There are people we don't serve. We're saying rabbits are better than dogs. You know what I'm saying? Like they're planting their flag that this is who we are and this is what we're passionate about. And the big danger is to believe you have to be completely neutral.
Yep.
Now, I present myself as neutral when it comes to politics. But I don't present myself neutral in other ways, like, oh, all marketing companies are great, right? I want to polarize in that way. I don't want them to necessarily like me. I say things like don't use hashtags on Facebook and people scream at me. So I'm okay with saying polarizing things. I'm just doing it in the arena where I feel comfortable doing it
Mm-hmm.
and where I believe I'm actually helping my audience. Um, and so I don't want anybody hearing this saying, well, I don't want to get into politics. What do you mean? Like, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be political at all.
Nope.
It can be the difference between, in the banking episode, we talked about the other banks are burning your money.
Yep.
There's some polarization there that is the big corporate bad guy. And we're the local people that actually support you. And we're one of you. That's polarizing, right?
Yep.
Maybe not for people as much, but you're definitely kind of taking a stand
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
saying something with conviction. And there aren't people that are like, I hate local business, I'm never going to support. Like, you're not going to tend to get that, but you're definitely taking a stand against something that you don't believe
It
in
needs to be
or something that you
defensible.
do believe in.
Yes, it just needs to be defensible, right? So like
Mhm.
if you're I think that's the main differentiator between good polarization and bad. Like if you can't defend it, if somebody asks you and like there's nothing to really back up your position other than this is just what I think, then you're it's not a good polarizing opinion to take. Like I do the same thing. I own a marketing agency. I say the same thing. Like I am mad at other agencies, most of other agencies, because of these certain things that they do. And I'll put that in my marketing material. Like, hey, here's the 5 things that marketing agencies are doing wrong. If your agency is doing one of these things, you should probably fire them. That's very polarizing. They're probably the business
In your
owner.
industry. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. To any business owner that's using a marketing agency too, right? They're like, well, I'm spending my hard-earned money. Like, why should I? Who are you to say that I don't know how to find the right marketing agency, right? It's
Mhm.
polarizing to businesses. I've had people say that to me, like, well, I didn't. I was kind of like standoffish about it when you said that, because I vetted this company, I know them, I trust them, but it's like it pulled
You're
me in.
almost saying that they made a bad decision and
Correct.
making them feel, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it's polarizing in that way too, but it's, does all the other marketing things that we talk about that are
And
important.
it
Like,
attracts the people that are like, oh my gosh, you're right.
yes,
This
yep.
isn't how I want to do things. Yeah.
Alienates the people that I don't want to work with. That are like, no, I made the right decision. Like, I didn't want to work with them anyway. Like,
Right.
yeah. So, yep. Love everything about this. And I'm really excited to start this business. I'm going to close down my bank. I'm going to close down my eco tour business. And I'm going to not be a financial advisor anymore. And I'm going to start this. Okay.
I'm
Boom.
keeping the pet store. I'm doing this. I'll do this with you on the side.
Sweet. Yeah, that
I'll
works.
keep the pet store.
Yeah, I'll
And
stay with
the
the pet
ice cream
store.
shop. I don't know. I kind of like frozen yogurt.
Yeah,
Like,
we can put the frozen yogurt in the. That was one thing that I had a lot in the '90s. Was what's that business? TCBY. I don't know if they were like
yeah.
national or whatever, but that was big in the '90s for me.
Yeah.
We can have a frozen yogurt shop in our OK Boomer store. That'd be cool.
And then we can have like the nostalgic candies to put on it.
Yes.
Like old school stuff to put on it. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
No, I love this. This was fun. This was deep, man.
It was deep.
It ends up going deep because it's just things to think about, and even like trends and where things are going. I think the nostalgia is absolutely huge. I think we are, one of the cyclical things I'm seeing is that switch from, okay, we shop at small mom and pops, but Walmart comes in, they have the better price, but now they've lost that human connection and nobody can help them, nobody knows anything. You feel kind of dirty shopping there. And you want to come back to who's everybody wants to go, or everybody knows your name, right?
Yep.
And so there's that swing back to that. And I think that if you can incorporate that too into this nostalgia type thing, I think it's golden.
Yeah, I'm in 100%. Let's do it.
Especially the e-com. We didn't even get into the e-commerce side, but oh my gosh,
that's one we should just do anyway. I should roll that into my t-shirt shop. We should just do that. Yeah.
You just need like all the licensing. That's the hard thing, is because it's still, everything is, it was such a corporate era. It was so corporate, and our entire existence wrapped around what corporations said that we wanted, and then we did want it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's there are things that are coming out of they're coming out to the Creative Commons license. Do you know what I'm talking about?
There you go.
Like Winnie the Pooh is not protected by copyright anymore. Like,
yeah, but that's like old. Now you're back into the 20s.
I know, but there are brands that were recognized. That was Winnie the Pooh was in the 90s for me. Like, I had Winnie the Pooh books and the show was around. So like,
true.
There are some things that you can take advantage of there. I feel like Mickey Mouse is coming up soon. Like, the actual logo is coming up soon.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be
like massive.
Meltdown.
Yeah, so I think that's literally like January, February of next year. It comes out of copyright. So yeah,
that's amazing.
Lots of opportunity.
I know. Gone with the Wind was one I always looked for. Like, when is Gone with the Wind coming out? That should be coming up soon-ish too. So that should be interesting.
Mm-hmm. I have a Google alert for things that are their copyright their trademarks expiring. So.
Let me know. I want to know. I want to know some, because I used to be super into that Creative Commons and public domain type stuff.
That's the one I'm looking for. Public domain. Yeah.
I used to be super into it and was like planning out like what books could I republish and sell and things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Duncan. This was fun once again. I like starting businesses with you. This was definitely a trip down memory lane too. I mean, the business is going to be successful when we have fun just talking about the subject of the business, because of the memories we have of growing up and the things that we attach to that. Any last words?
Any last words? Pay attention to large market trends that you can take advantage of in your small local business. They are there, and if you know how to kind of keep an eye out for them and take advantage of them for your local business, they can be extremely powerful, because most people do not pay attention to them. They are swept up in them and they participate unknowingly. right? Like
Right.
you get swept up in marketing campaigns all the time without really knowing that are attached psychologically to trends like this nostalgia thing that's happening. So try and be aware of it, and try and come up with ideas for how to incorporate it into your own marketing.
Yeah. How do you bring nostalgia into your own
Yeah.
business?
Mhm.
Like you might not start a nostalgia store, but how can you bring that nostalgia into it?
Yeah. Hmm.
That's really, really cool. I think that's almost a whole discussion on itself is how do we take this thing that's happening and apply it to a plumbing company,
100%. Yeah.
so I love it. All right, thank you so much, Duncan. This was a lot of fun as usual. I'm excited for our next business, which is going to be a boring business. I have not just a boring business, but I think a business that people generally hate.
Oh boy.
So I think it's pretty exciting, but I think most people would say, I hate that.
Mm,
And yet they spend a lot of money there.
mm.
So
Okay.
that's what we're going to talk about next time. In the meantime, guys, we would love to hear from you if you're listening to this podcast and you have the ability to comment somewhere. Let us know how you like this podcast. If you have any ideas for us to cover, if you want to challenge us and challenge our ability to come up with ideas, feel free. And everybody should be joining our Facebook group, Daily Marketing Ideas with Ali and Duncan. If you just do a search for that in Facebook, you will find it. It's got a little flame next to the name. I think it's flame or a starburst or something. Join that group because we post in there daily, and we share our marketing insights and ideas and strategies. And we just had somebody post in the group today that she made $1,700 from a strategy that we shared. So check out that group, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.